Hello all, Zyceres here. We are updating the tier list that I make for the Decayed Hope sector this time, where I do this as like a retrospective on each sector as we finish them. This sector has about 9 days left in it. So that's what we're doing in these current videos. Uh, Before we go into the actual tier list itself, let's just quickly go over how I do split up the tiers. So I split up the tiers into a number of categories, with the S tier being the ones that I think are too polarizing, too strong. These are things that I think deserve any nerfs that they get. They're uh, generally going to overperform versus basically everything, and they don't really leave space for other items to exist. The A tier is probably still above the curve. I don't really think these things are balanced, but they're not so much above the curve that they would be a problem. Like, these are things that you want to be careful with nerfing. Big nerfs will probably make them too weak, and the like they can kind of exist in the state that they're in, and it's not. They will probably be used a lot more often, but they're not going to like truly overtake the meta in any form, similar to how, say, Plasma Sentinels did early on, or the spontaneous cubes did last sector. Uh, Next up is B. Anything in B I think is actually balanced. Generally, I consider B to be the first of the balanced tiers. I think that things in B are balanced and feel good. C, I think they're probably reasonably balanced, but there's some clunkiness or something that's like holding them back from actually like feeling pretty good in whatever aspect they are in. Uh, for D, I think these things are a little bit undertuned. So it's like the flip side of like the A tier, where these things are, I think, below the curve and they don't really feel right. Um, and they, you don't want to be like super generous with buff. You wouldn't want to be super generous with buffs with them, but they probably do need something to put them above, back up into the like more balanced tiers. And F, anything in F is fundamentally failed, I would say. They have really big issues. They need something big to really like even possibly like completely being reworked, or like huge impactful new mod augments, upgrade change, whatever. They need something to really be usable. You would only really, I feel like you'd only really use F for the most part to be contrarian. But anyway, let's get into the tier list. Okay, so we're doing the builder tier list now. Um, so we are going to start with the assassin, which is here. Uh, it's going straight into the A tier. This is higher than it was last tier list. If you watched the last tier list, you may have noted that I went into great length about how the assassin was balanced because it is a 70 capacity guard versus the Warmonger's 50, and they are comparable, but the assassin is slightly better, and the 20 points are justified. It's not a 70 capacity guard, it is a 50 capacity guard. I was misremembering, and it is better than the Warmonger, which is already a pretty good guard. In a lot of cases, it is very good at ambushes. It has some shenanigans where it can drop down. It's really hard to spot. The sound is, I don't, like, I think it's directional, maybe. It's really hard to find where an assassin is just based purely off the sound. Um, yes, it has worse armor, but also its attack pattern is insane a lot of the time, particularly when it comes to how it interacts with ramps. Um, but it's not like super oppressive. They are awkwardly tall, the armor is awkwardly small, it is really easy if you can spot them to deal with them. Um, they do make, as melee guards, they do make good use of Dead Man Switch. Um, and I guess as Orgard and like certain augments work better on melee guards, but there's not that many of them. And they don't have any like unique augment that pushes them over the edge or anything. So yeah, this is mostly moving up because of the fact that it is 50 capacity, not 70. It should have been slightly higher in the last one. They are better than Warmongers, and Warmongers are already pretty good. Um, in a lot of cases. So yeah, Assassins A tier. Next up, we have the Boltshot. The Boltshot is going to go. I believe this one's the Boltshot into the C tier. I previously had them in the D tier. I've moved them up because I think I just wasn't giving them enough credit. They do have a lot of uses. They are hard countered by the Fury's Edge, but at least with the Fury's Edge, there is awkwardness on whether you are dealing with a relentless or a normal, and Hunter can catch people out a lot. There's a lot of things with the relentless bolt shot that their mods have a lot of good variation between it. Um, there's a lot of there's a lot of danger with that, and the even just like running from like bolt shot to bolt shot corridor, it's not like super dangerous, but it can be a nuisance and catch people off guard. And if yeah, the I feel like they were better than I was giving them credit for. I moved them up a tier because of that. I do think they're still a little clunky. The there is some shenanigans where you just randomly survive sometimes, and like if they're relentless, you can full dodge them without um, actually using any equipment whatsoever, which is kind of silly. And they do only fire once or twice with double down, but it's such a long rearm period. It's really easy to deal with them before they can fire again, or just step back. Um, yeah, I think that I still think they're not quite where they need to be, but they're not super bad. They're still balanced. I think they're just a little clunky at times. Next up, we have the Bomb Ejector. I am moving the Bomb Ejector. It is going from B previously to A. This just comes down to like, so the reason I kept them in B is like I feel like bomb ejectors, every bomb ejector has a solution that requires no special gear from the raider. Like every bomb ejector that exists in the world has some way to beat it. Um, if they are too close to the raider, you can deal with them with any weapon that can destroy traps, and you will probably have one of those in any serious loadout. If they are, so you have to move them further away, um, which means you generally have to do a wider split. And once you start doing wider splits, those bombs, once you move them further away, those bombs are going over a wider area. There's less area to cover the actual corridor that leads to the bomb trap, which means that you can actually be safe. Not necessarily like at the top end of where the bomb trap is, but like in the structure that the bombs exist in. Um, and if you try and like get that, then you don't cover as much of a wide area, and then when you don't cover a wide area, you can go back or forward to dodge the bomb trap. So like every individual bomb trap has a solution, I feel. Um, but working out what that solution is for every single bomb trap that you run into, and particularly as each individual bomb trap has its own solution. There's no like universal solution for all of them. It's just a lot, and because it's a lot and it's hard to work out, and they're so versatile, I've moved them up a tier. I don't actually think they are fully broken. They're like even uh like none of the weapons deal with them particularly well at the moment. There's an awkward thing with timing of the arc barrier where if you don't get a perfect block, I believe the first and the last explosions can actually be about 1 second desynced, which means that you can potentially still die even if you do get a block properly. Um, but yeah, the bomb. So like you have to like heavily invest into the arc barrier to have like a good solution for bomb ejectors. But yeah, you can there are things you can do, uh, regardless. Like the Lodestar can create more safe area. The arc barrier can actually block everything if you can get the timing right. The swords and plasma bow, the swords, and I guess the plasma bow, although it's a little harder with the plasma bow, can actually destroy the bombs near you, so that maybe you can create a safe area that way. Um, and consumables, you can just do whatever. Um, so there are answers to, I think there's an answer to every bomb ejector without using any equipment, and like every piece of equipment has a uh, way to deal with the bomb ejector a little bit, of varying degrees of success. So that's why I think they're A, not S. I don't think they're actually broken. I think they could exist in this state and it would be fine. It's just not. Um, It's just not. They are above the curve. I would be surprised to run into a difficult map that doesn't at least use some of these for the most part. Okay, so next up we have the Burster. It has just been added to the game. It's going onto the tier list for the first time. I'm putting it in F. There is a slight case where how well it uses the Deadman switch augment might actually be justification to put it up to D. But because of the fact that to actually get someone with the Deadman Switch augment, you actually need to distract them from the fact there was a Deadman Switch there, and that is almost impossible to do because the bursters kill all the other like melee guards around. So you have to try and use the ranged guards to do it. But if you're using a range guard, like if the person deals with a range guard, they might move towards the range guard and they just lose the burst deadman switch. Um, like it is nice that they are faster than other guards. Uh, it just doesn't really create a scenario where the burst burster itself is good. It's also nice that they can like chill in Corrosive Cubes. That creates a really nice environment and a really fun like moment when they all like charge out at you. Um, using like Bloodlust and hiding them in the Corrosion Cube, but it just doesn't really it doesn't work in practice. And because it doesn't work in practice, I'm just putting them into the F tier. There could be a bunch of things that could change, but like anything that changes and helps the bursters is probably justified. Because they don't really have a good use case currently. Um, the best use I can find for bursters is actually in areas where the raider can never access, as part of the machinery of A level to, you know, run through tunnels, die to fall damage, and then trigger Deadman Switch to, you know, open up a Masquerade Holocube type thing. That's like the best I can think of for this. Um, yeah, and it's just not like any guard could do that. It's just that the bursters are slightly better at it. Um, yeah, it's just doesn't really function. Cannonbacks. Cannonbacks were A tier previously, and I am throwing them right back into the A tier. I don't think this should be a surprise for anyone that plays this game. Cannonbacks are generally just a really big pain to deal with. They have a really good set of armor when you put it on them. Their head is really hard to hit because of the way it wobbles around quite a lot. So obviously the the cannon is a much better target, but you can only really hit that when it's aggroed, which gives you a limited time to actually deal with it. Um, the melee, you basically can't deal with it with the Fury's Edge. Once it's aggroed, uh, it requires an unlocked attack, and the attack animation is way too short. It's a bit of a problem. The Sledge Blade can stun lock it with its by breaking the armor, which is a better option. Um, but the main thing that keeps them from being like actually S tier is the fact that if you can like hang off the roof, which you can kind of do because they need to be in an open area most of the time, or if not an open area on like a ramp. Um, and in both cases, you can in the ramp case, you can actually just sidestep it and in the middle of the ramp, and they'll roll down the ramp, and you'll be safe. In the open room case, which is these are the only two cases that you can really use Cannonbacks. You can actually stick to the roof, and if you stick to the roof, you're pretty much immune because the Cannonback hit you, the ball will fall, and it will fall so low that you won't ever get hit by it. The problem is with that is that you have to deal with every other thing in the room. Every Plasma Sentinel, every Ravager, every Enforcer has to be dealt. Every Hornet has to be dealt with, and probably every Sentry Beam has to be dealt with for you to hang off the roof to safely deal with the Cannonbacks. So, if you're just using Cannonbacks, that's a good solution. Um, and it keeps them from being like really overpowered. But the um they need support from other things, and when there is support from other things, the Cannonbacks become the main thing that you have to deal with, and they are hard to deal with. So yeah, the they're just going back into A tier for this. I think I don't think they're so problematic, even though they do snipe me all the time, from just seemingly out of nowhere. But I don't think they're so problematic that I actually think they go into the S tier here. I still think that there are answers and there are answers and enough problems with their use that you can just deal with them. And technically, the Lodestar as a new weapon, does give you a new answer for them because you can use them to defense backfire, similar to you can use them to cause more defense backfires by putting your shield up, which is fun, similar to both the Sentry Beam and the bomb ejectors, but I think they fire just a little bit too fast and it's a little bit too many uh, yeah, just a little bit too many explosions to do that reliably, which means that one of the best things to deal with is just put a shield in front of them so that they destroy themselves instead of trying to do defense backfire stuff with your shield. Um, Still, it's an option. It's just another thing that like keeps them from being really outrageous. They're just kind of outrageous instead. Okay, so corrosive cubes are up next. Corrosive cubes are actually the only thing that directly had a balance change in either the Sector 3 or Mid-Sector updates, because the Mid-Sector update had the two new defenses, which means that it was bigger and not as focused on balance changes like they normally are. The Corrosive Cube had its spontaneous significantly nerfed. Um, it I can't remember the full list of changes, but basically, if there was a number, it got reduced. It doesn't kill as fast. It has a smaller radius. It doesn't last as long. They don't shoot out quite as many pulls. Um, just everything. Everything got reduced. And because of that, because everything got reduced, it's actually dropping from the S tier down to the B tier. I think that the spontaneous is still kind of useful because it is a pain to start because you have to like focus on your um, bunny hopping while you're doing everything else, and uh, you can't deal with the cube itself, unlike bursters, which you can deal with. The so you are always going to have to be bunny hopping in whatever area that is. It's nowhere near as egregious as it was before. You can generally walk through those areas by just being careful to keep an eye out for when the spiders happen. It's all just generally uh, more dealable with than it was previously, and like I do think that a lot of maps do use a lot of corrosive cubes, but that's just because that's just because of they are their main like uniqueness, which is that they are an area that you, as the raider, can enter but can't stay in for even like a very short length of time, which makes them quite useful, quite versatile, and they are dirt cheap. Like us set, like if you were to use um 50 corrosive cubes, that's only what 1,000 capacity. That's like a third of like most of the other, like either half or a third, depending on the trap and the yeah, and that's a lot of corrosive cubes, but like you just need a lot when you're doing setups like that. It when you're doing a setup a lot of the time, it's not really a trap that just is used as a one-off. Um, but yeah, just I think it's good. It's good enough. But it's like at that like balanced tier now because I don't think the spontaneous uh, is pushing it really far above what other things are capable of now, and it's back into where it probably should be. So Deathblossoms. Deathblossoms are going into B. They are a new trap. The reason for this is the mines act very similar to Death Pistons, though the Deathblossom is more expensive. The trade-off though is that the Deathblossom has a bunch of like really technical things you can do with it that the Piston can't really manage, and also you get two mines. If you can get your placements right, you can actually effectively replace two Pistons for the same cost. The only downside is they're more vulnerable to the Vault Lancer. You can't get the situation where all the ammo of the Vault Lancer is trapped in the Incinerator corridor, but that situation only really occurs against slow players, and slow players can deal with Death Blossoms. It is more of a this trap and Pistons as well as Pistons are specifically much better against speedrunners, and that's where they excel, and that's generally what they're good for. Um, and a lot of their downsides that seem overwhelming can't be exploited by a speedrunner because the speedrunner has to do things in fractions of a second. It's like visual reaction time. You can't even like properly hear these, and oftentimes the mine explodes so quickly that even if you do hear the mine start to go off, you can't get your shield in time. Because it is a very fast explosion. Um, Technically, you can go through them at grapple speed, but you have to do it at like exactly the right angle, and you don't have time to set up that angle most of the time if there's any pressure anywhere nearby. And the explosion, if you touch it, is something that keeps it in check for more meme loadouts that can't deal with traps at all. Because without that, they become completely impossible forever, and uh, that's not really fun. Like, if I want to play dual shield, I would like to have an option for this. And yeah, just making the Death Blossoms explode when you touch them does that. Also, there are some uh, shenanigans you can do where you can actually exploit that explosion to actually create some more difficult choices for the raider, like putting it on the floor that they have to walk across, for instance. But anyway, yeah, Deathblossoms, I think they're like highly versatile. All their features seem to work in their favor. It's just a matter of like finding the right spot for them, which is difficult. And I think that over time we will see them be used more. And I just think they're relatively comparable with the Death Pistons for dealing with speedrunners, and that's one of the best traps for dealing with speedrunners. So uh, it's hard to put them any lower. Speaking of Death Pistons, because it does come up quite a lot when we're talking about the Deathblossoms, I also put the Death Piston in B. Um, the Death Piston doesn't have as much of the like technical aspects to it. It is generally you just put it in a spot and you probably give it pulverize, unless it's right next to one with pulverize, in which case then maybe you don't, just so that they're desynced. Doesn't really matter. Maybe they're sometimes there's blockade, sometimes there's self-destruct, sometimes there's a lot of things you can do with Death Pistons. Um, but it mostly just comes down to they will catch a speedrunner. They don't require they don't require the runner to trigger anything, so they just have a good chance of catching them um, if well placed. And yeah, like, but the if you aren't a speedrunner, you can fairly easily see them, and because they pop out in and out constantly, they're um, very visible at a very long range. It's very easy to, slow down, deal with them. It's not really a problem. And I think that like this is just another trap that that tries to force you to slow down, and it's you can't force someone to slow down because if you you can't have it be so that the everyone has to play slow, because if everyone has to play slow, then A, people that enjoy going fast and not going to have fun, but also B, if you create a situation that you have to go fast, then there's no way for you to actually beat that level. Um, because you just put those two situations overlapping, and all of a sudden the you have an unwinnable map. Um, so yeah, it has answers even when you are going fast. It's much easier to answer if you aren't. It's very similar to the Deathblossom in this way, but yeah, it's a speedrun. It's a trap for speedrunners. You catch speedrunners with it. It has some fun shenanigans with how it ricochets things, but yeah, it's mostly it's mostly just there to catch speedrunners. Just randomly place them throughout your base. Works fine. It's a lot easier to use than Deathblossom because you don't need to like work out particular spots so that you can actually make full value out of the mines. Um, you can just kind of throw these wherever, though it does require a full block of clear space. Um, you can't have a like Impaler or a Launchpad in that space, which you could do with the mine. Anyway, that is that one. We're going over the Enforcer next, which I am putting into the C tier. They haven't moved. They are right where they were last time. The reason for this is they kind of just they're not a bad guard. They're definitely worth their 50 capacity, and they do work. They're and there are like particular situations where they're not worse than Ravagers, but Ravagers are generally better in almost all cases, unless there's a like fairly extreme range. like they kind of work as like a sniper guard, but they don't, which we don't have another option for. Uh, like sniper, you can get sniped by cannonbacks, but it's not the same. Um, so like they're good if you're expecting the raider to be outside of about that 7-8 range, block range that the Ravager's shots go. Um, but they cost the same, have similar armor, fire at a similar rate, have the roughly similar aggro timings. It's there's not a lot going for them, and like their one like unique augment is the Seeker bolts, which after it travels about 2 blocks can re-angle the bolt by about like 15-ish degrees towards where the raider is now, and then continue on. Uh, but the problem is that's a very small number, or it's a very small amount of turn that it can do. It only does it once, it only does it after about 2 blocks. So if you're too close or very far away, or even if you're not very far away, it's generally beaten by just continuing to move in the exact same direction that you were already moving. So it doesn't lead you, it goes where you were, so that you only die if uh, if you move within the first probably like quarter second, maybe not even that, of the bolt coming at you, and then don't move again. Um, and it's like 15 capacity to do that. I that that's their one like one unique augment that I think like really helps them in this like sniper role that they have. It would really help them with their sniper role that they have if it actually worked for the purposes. Like I think if it was every 2 blocks did like a 15-degree thing, it would actually be able to chase you a little bit, and I think that would be reasonable, but it's just not. Um, and it costs so much. You're, yeah, I there's like very very weird cases where you can use it. I've heard that because it doesn't arc as much, you can use it to so that you don't hit the roof in certain situations. That's really that's really iffy for 15 points. But it, it would help them in the situation they're in, but it doesn't. It's not good enough. I would like it to be better. Um, or for them to have something else that will help them with their role as like sniper. If we ever get an actual like replacement for its sniper role, then it becomes it becomes just like a really bad guard. Um, and it's we're not there yet, so it may just continue in its current state. But yeah, it's a little clunky. It really needs to be better at this long range role that it has fallen into because Ravagers are generally better at the close range to mid range. Um, and yeah, it's like one unique augment just doesn't really help it. Holocubes are up next. They're not moving. They are going into B tier. They're good. Wait, B? Was it B? No, C tier. Okay, never mind. They're good enough. Like they're a little easy to spot. You kind of need the picture perfect to avoid that, but even then, you have to use them near bedrock, or at least somewhere where bedrock could be. Um, Once they disappear, the trap starts firing, and that has that whatever load up that happens. There's some like really technical stuff you can do with Masquerade that's kind of fun. Um, there you can make some like good setups where like all their mods work in their favor. It's just that like because they don't directly kill, and like missing one of these doesn't really cause the Raider to die, which makes sense because they activate immediately. That would be a real big problem if they did that. It's just a little bit um, it's just a little bit clunky, but there are a lot of like technical things you can do with it, and I think leaning more into that technical side, uh, maybe you can get some maybe you can get some more mods that do other shenanigans like um, I don't know off the top of my head, like maybe one where it doesn't trigger unless the raider hits it with a weapon or something. That could be fun for like an ammo trap type situation. But the will like it's just like it's a little clunky because it's just doesn't have like a good payoff once the thing has been revealed. Though there are just a lot of like really like fun things you can do with holocubes that like if we were talking about um just like what is this good for? If we were talking about like cinematic-y type things, then yeah, this would be a lot more this would be like a very cinematic piece, but it, it's not really good as a trap. And because it takes one of your trap capacity, that becomes a whole thing. But yeah, uh, it's still reasonably good, so we're just going to keep it in C for now. Hornets. Hornets are going into the C tier as well. They were in C last time. They have a similar problem to Enforcers. They just like kinda outvalued by basically everything. Their shots fire so infrequently and are so slow. It is like slightly difficult to deal with them, and occasionally you can just lose ammo trying to if you miss a shot on a Hornet. But like, eh, like I know personally I'd like to deal with Hornets with a sledge blade because of that, but the it's not strictly necessary. Um, like you can't. They have like weirdly small armor. They do have a unique mod. That unique mod is very unique augments. That unique augment is very good. It puts out a slowing field. It doesn't really push them up, I don't think, because there are some like awkwardness with that slowing field where it is quite large. Um, but it's where you were quite a while back because it takes so long for the bolt to actually go past and actually hit something. Um, and there's just it doesn't. I I think there's something I haven't tested this, but there seems to be some things where like when you're moving in that slowing field, you're just not slowed. Like I don't know if it slows lunge speed or maybe even grapple wheeling speed. Which is like two huge problems with it. I just need to look into it because it may actually just be a movement speed decrease. But yeah, it's good. It's good. It's definitely worth the cost. Um it's not good enough to push the Hornet to a new level of power. It's still a Hornet. Impalers. I've definitely referred to these before as the best and worst trap in the game. They're going into the D tier. They were in the D tier previously. The reason I call them the best and worst trap in the game is because no one should ever be hit by an impaler, but impalers are about the only thing that can actually catch good players because you you never really expect them to be anywhere because they're kind of bad, but the moment you take even like the slightest step back, um, for whatever reason, there was an impaler there that killed you. That's now killed you. It happens all the time. They are purely a surprise trap. Um, the and like even their mods that they do have lean into that. Like the this new red hot one, which is quite good. Is because it just means that you can get the Impaler kill on the side rather than have to get specifically on the tips. Um, yeah, just it like they fire faster than other traps, but yeah, it's entire and they're kind of quiet, but it's just entirely you gotta catch them by surprise. They have to be backing up because it doesn't fire fast enough to catch someone that just walks over them. It um it even in like the best situation, the Impaler, even if you get like a perfect Impaler, perfectly positioned Impaler, you're not gonna generally get the Impaler kill. It'll happen, and it's worth it for the capacity costs because these are dirt cheap. So it's worth throwing some around to just randomly catch people sometimes. But the they don't work consistently because they just are not super effective at what they try to do. Death Pistons generally will catch people more often than the Impaler ever will. Incinerators are up next. We'd already made the changes to Incinerator were all done by the end of last sector. There hasn't been any changes since. I'm still keeping them in the B tier. We've got a lot more experience with them. I find grappling through them sideways, where you can go through a single stream of them, not a is not really a thing that you can do very often in actual incinerator setups, because the incinerator setups that are actually effective normally have you charging either directly away or directly towards. Um, the the for like a more fun thing, we actually don't see anywhere near as many of the the incinerator setups where they block off so many of the beams and make them like really hard to actually deal with. Those just don't really happen anymore, which is just like a benefit because those things were just like they were just a pain, and like occasionally there would be a glitch that would, you know, block off and make like a one-way door that you can't come back through, and then all of a sudden you just can't deal with that incinerator. Um, and that was just that that hasn't happened in the past couple sectors, but like the possibility of that happening again would just like if that happened again and the incinerators were still really good, it's just like a huge pain when it happened. So like they're fine, they work, they still do the big area denial thing of a certain area. There are certain loadouts that straight up just can't deal with that can like straight up be locked down completely because an incinerator is in the right spot. Particularly anything that like can't destroy traps, like dual shield. If you point two incinerators at one another, put a few pistons towards the one that's further away from the player, they can't deal with it. They can't deal with it, and because they can't deal with it, they will die in that corridor, and that is a complete block for them. And like that's only possible because incinerators are pretty good. Um, there are some shenanigans you can do where you can get the timing right. You can actually like block with the arc barrier, then swing with a sword. But yeah, it's still just a pretty good trap. It's just that it's now more in line with how the napalm worked previously, and uh, it just it's still a problem to deal with, and I think it's still like I just think it's not overpowered like it was before. Ironcore similarly, they had massive buffs at one point, but that was before the end of the last sector, so that's already happened. They're going into the B tier. The main difference between last sector and this sector is this sector there seems to be something, I don't know what it is, where sometimes the Iron Claw stops you from swinging your sword. It seems to cancel the animation if you were already swinging it, and if and sometimes it won't let you swing after you've been grabbed. Um, and sometimes you get back the ability pretty quickly. Sometimes it like actually gets to start reeling you in potentially the whole way in, and you just can't swing your sword the whole time. I don't know what triggers it. It's very inconsistent. But like it just happens sometimes. Uh, and considering one of the ways to deal with this is to swing a sword at it, and the Fury's Edge in particular, which is shorter, is and thus generally it was better to let it hit you and then swing afterwards. It's kind of awkward, and like we don't really need a trap that has, especially not like something that's inconsistent with melee. Um, so that is a bug that is technically making the Iron Claw better, but it's not like a huge one, and the fact that it's actually very inconsistent is just yeah, it's a limiting factor on it, so it's not moving it up at all. I think it would if it happened every time, 100% I'd be moving this up a tier, but it's mostly just about that like very short. Its best use case is still that very short amount of time just after it catches the radar where they stop where they are. And that was the same last sector. That was still there last sector. That's how it's supposed to work. And that is the important use case for them. And they are great at it. They're great at it, but obviously there are limiting things because there's so many ways to deal with the grappling hook. Launchpads, the last of the new stuff. Launchpads are going into A. Going straight into A. I think that generally speaking, launchpads are fine. There are some fun things you can do where you can actually like make them not actually lethal, and you can have some shenanigans with that. The main use case for launchpads is to launch into a corrosion cube. There are obviously some other cases where you like launch people into a dangerous situation that they're likely to try and back out of, or into like the tip of an impaler, or um, which is most common with like you put the launch pad on the roof um, over a holocube with an impaler at the bottom. Uh, but yeah, the those I think perfectly fine. Those will probably just jump into the B tier. The biggest problem with it is camo. Specifically camo on certain blocks. It's not too bad on like the yellow blocks from the um, Scorched Necropolis cosmetic pack, but but particularly on like the pipe blocks, it's basically impossible to see. Like you can know that there is a launch pad there and not be able to see them a lot of the time. And that is a huge problem. That is a huge problem. Like not being able to see what you're dealing with, it feels really scum when you get hit by something that you can't see, that you had very little time to react to, because they are the fastest trap, and it is basically instant death. Like yes, they are kind of more expensive because they are, I believe, 50, and then you need to get the corrosive cube to kill the raider. You can kind of aim, you can kind of see where some of them are, and you can like just aim where the launch pad that would kill you could be, and that kind of works. But there's just a little too many situations where you hide what can kill the radar, and because they just get flung into it and they don't really have a lot of time to react. And specifically, even when they do react, sometimes they still die to it. Like you can block the launch pad with the arc barrier and still be launched. And that's probably the biggest issue. And uh, you can do it with the lodestar as well. You can block it and still be launched. That typically means that you were on the other side of the shield. The arc barrier one though, like you can't be on the other side of the shield. That's just like a big problem, and I'm sure that there's probably something similar with swords, where you get hit and then the lunge goes off. Um, yeah, there's a little bit of shenanigans where the timing of it doesn't seem quite right. Camo is too invisible on certain blocks. I I would like it, like honestly, if you just nerf the camo thing, I think it would be fine. Um, if ca camo was, say, like there's a number of ways you could fix it, like maybe camo on certain blocks is not as opaque as it is on others, so that the the trap is more visible. And you can like categorize them, categorize the block types so that you can get more and less visibility, invisibility based off what it's stuck to, or um, I don't know if turning down the invisibility helps uh, that much. Um, but yeah, I think the camo ones are just a big problem. It's a pain. You have to deal with them. You have to have a way of dealing with them, and if you like don't have a melee weapon where you can just like use the lunge to work out where they are, you kind of just have to either run past and just wait till you get killed by one, or just shoot every wall, and that's neither of those are fun. Neither of those are fun. It and it's just a big problem, and it's not a big enough problem that you like. It has answers. It's not. It would be fine. It could be fine if it was to stay in the game. We've been dealing with it for months at this point. It hasn't been super oppressive, and like sometimes those setups just don't work. Like you'll hit a wall or something, and that's that's fine. That's the cost of trying to use this, and like it is a fairly expensive setup because you need the Corrosive Cube to pay it off. Uh, it's just, yep, it's. I think it's like too good for the cost. Um, no other 70 cost trap has ever been like basically instant death. And like yes, it doesn't cost 70, but with the we're adding in the Corrosive Cube. Plasma Sentinels haven't had any changes. They haven't moved. Their bolts still are really slow. They take ages to reach the radar, and they can be dodged fairly easily. So I'm still putting them into the C tier. Their unique self-destruct is still useful. The Plasma Novas do lock down areas, which can be fun, but is because of the tiny little bubbles, it's not like super impactful. It's and like a lot of them can be difficult to deal with. They're all coming from different directions, but they're only really dangerous if you're heading towards them. All the same things that Plasma Sentinels have always done. They're still in the same spot. They they were a little easy to deal with outside of being in bulk numbers. And if they are being used in bulk numbers, then you are spending a ton of capacity on them, which is a problem because they are now because of the they are now 70 cost traps. It's yeah, it they are almost good enough, but not quite. It's just a little they fire a little bit too slow or something, or the bolts travel a little bit too slow. Something like that. Um, Although I feel like the bolts traveling so slow and the fire rate being so slow is actually probably what gets me most of the time, rather than the other things, because I think that I'm completely safe because nothing takes that long to travel. But anyway, yeah, I still think they're like they're balanced-ish, but they're just like a little bit. a little weak. They could probably use a little bit of a boost. But it wouldn't want to be too much. Ravagers are up next. They go straight into B. I think they're fine. I don't think they're super oppressive, not since the nerfs to them. Um, I do quite like the like shotgun spread pattern they have. It's yeah, obviously doesn't cover a huge area, but it's not uh, like completely laughable like it was when that first happened. Um, that like you can dodge them by moving quickly, which is good. Because if you can't dodge them by moving quickly, then all of a sudden you have to move slowly, and moving slowly gets you killed by anything that's not a Ravager, and that fork was a problem initially, but we've had that solved for a while. I think they're in a good spot. They they kind of they kind of are just better enforcers for a lot of situations because 7 blocks is a very like 7-8 blocks, which is the range for their bolts to travel. It's a very long range. But you do need to like lock them onto something because they will try to approach if they can, and they have a really fast attack speed. They have a really fast attack speed, so it makes it like once they're aggroed, it makes them hard to deal with, which is the the main thing that keeps them above enforcers. You just can't really approach them safely. Um, but yeah, so I feel like they're just better enforcers. Like they don't have a lot of the clunkiness. But the fact that they have limitations keeps them in check. Okay, so now we're doing Sentry Beams. Sentry Beams are probably the trap that has been most affected by the inclusion of the Lodestar Shield, because now there is always a way for a player to use a defensive item to destroy the Sentry Beam or potentially get defense backfires, and it's the easiest thing to get defense backfires with the Lodestar. There are like the Cannonback and the Bomb Ejector can also be used with the Lodestar to get defense backfires, but the Sentry Beam is the best for it. It's just the easiest one to aim. Still not particularly easy, but it is yeah, it is the best of those. And I actually think that I may have had this misjudged last sector because I didn't see any particularly strong Sentry Beam setups that were hard to approach, that had a lot of threats elsewhere that didn't just like completely defense backfire when you like stepped in and walked out, which is generally what happened with Sentry Beams. I have seen a few of those now, but I now have an option to deal with them, which I think is why I'm putting them in B this time. Um, if we hadn't got the Lodestar, I actually probably would have moved them up. Um, but the inclusion of the Lodestar, now have an answer to it, to the exact thing that I'm worried about. It's fine. It it works well. It's a good trap. All the buffs have been very good. They haven't quite pushed it too far. It's yeah, and there hasn't been any changes since the last sector, so we're just sticking with it here. Lastly, Warmonger. It's doing the same thing. It's going where it was. No changes to that. Lodestar the Lodestar actually specifically has trouble with Warmongers because Warmongers' attack pattern is really strange. They like lift their hands in the air and then like jump and then come down, which oftentimes means that the Lodestar shield will be underneath where their attack pattern is. Uh, but that feels more like a thing for the Lodestar, and the Lodestar can deal with it by either aiming up or getting closer to the shield. Whatever. That feels like more of a problem for the Lodestar. Nothing else has changed with them. And the Warmongers themselves are just as strong as they've always been. They still have the good armor. They still attack fairly fast. They move relatively fast. They can catch up to people, and they just body block very well because of how wide they are. Um, it's hard to like I don't think they're overpowered because there's so many ways to deal with them, and even in situations like the Lodestar where the it's not the best weapon for dealing with them, it it has options. Like the Falcon, the Warmonger is probably the guard that is the hardest to deal with the Falconic Plasma Bow because it has good armor and uh, is a melee range guard. If it gets near you, it's hard to take the time to actually aim the shot. But the the weapons on the side are big targets that the Falconic Plasma Bow can hit in a panic situation very easily, um, which is something that keeps it from being overpowered. So anyway, um, that would be why I'm keeping the Warmonger into the B because I just think it's relatively well balanced. Um, just by the fact that it is a melee guard with a not great attack pattern. So final thoughts, I have moved things around a little bit. There hasn't actually been big changes in how the builder meta works because the only thing that's been added is the Lodestar, and the main thing that really affected I actually didn't move because I think I undervalued it last sector a little bit, which was the Sentry Beam in particular. But we have moved some things up just because I think uh, I think they were a little bit better, and it does make sense to make better use of the A tier. Um, but I think that for the builder side of things, I don't think there's anything that's like truly overpowered. It's really just um, some things that are like slightly above the curve, and there are a few of them as opposed to the Raider side, where I think that the most things come in a little bit more evenly. But yeah, that is it for today. I will see you next time.